Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of The Robust Opposition. I'm doing my show on YouTube Live and at an unusual time, noon Pacific time, because I have a very special guest who is coming to us live from the Gaza Strip. And she does not have a Facebook account. So, and also there's a 10-hour time difference. So I'm going to invite, I've never done my show from my YouTube channel before, but I've tested it out and the connection works. So I want to invite my two guests on here by sending them an invitation to join the broadcast. Let's see. And then I will introduce them. All right. So as many of you who have been following the situation on the Gaza Strip now, we know that for the past few months, there have been some skirmishes. And basically what's happening is there's nonviolent protesters, and Israel is reacting in an extremely violent fashion. Now, Hind Khoudary is a journalist from Gaza. She grew up in Gaza, and she reports for Palestine Media Productions, RT International, KTV2, which is the state of Kuwait's English language station, and she reports for Middle East Eye. So she is here with us right now from the Gaza Strip, and I'm going to bring her in. Hi, Hind.
Hi. Hello.
Oh, it's so dark there.
I'm sorry, the electricity went off again, and I managed to get some data to do this call. I'm sorry.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's the situation that you have going on there. Is they only had 4 hours of electricity today, but I guess it was only 3 because when we did the test 3 hours ago, you said it was going to be 4. Does that happen often?
Yes.
Wow.
Unfortunately.
I have an ability to share my screen. And what I wanted to do was show just a little bit of this clip of you reporting for RT. So let me try this and see if it works.
Okay.
Yeah, let me try to go. I'm going to move this around a little bit. Okay, let me just see.
We are now 100 meters away from the fence that separates Gaza Strip and Israel. Palestinian youth have been burning tires since the morning near the fence to blur the vision of the snipers, Israeli snipers, to shoot or target any Palestinians. The Israelis have been using wastewater to disperse the protesters. Palestinians are still coming. They're still marching, and hundreds of Palestinians have been here since the morning. And we saw Palestinian protesters burning U.S. flags and Israeli flags, and also saying slogans against the Israelis and the Americans since the morning. Tension is running high right now, and Palestinians are still in the field and still near the fence.
Okay. Let me get rid of this thing. Okay, hold on. This is like totally new for me. Did that work? Were you able to see yourself, the footage of you?
Well, I can see myself, but I didn't see the link you posted. I only heard the voice.
Okay, well, hopefully it worked. I won't know until I actually check this broadcast. So why don't you describe this footage was on April 9th, and obviously things have gotten worse. First of all, what are the conditions? Let's go all the way back. What are the conditions in Gaza that Israel has put you guys under for the last 11 years, so we can set the scene for why there is this resistance?
Okay, so Gaza Strip is an open-air jail for 2 million Palestinians. More than 70% of these Palestinians are refugees. And back in 1948, 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from their homes back in 1948 when the State of Israel was created. So, 11 years of siege, Gaza Strip has been witnessing high unemployment rates, high poverty rates, high food insecurity rates, and more than 80% of the Palestinians here depend on international aid, financial aid, and food aid. So what's happening now is Palestinians have zero freedom of movement. They can't go outside Gaza Strip to get some treatment, to get a vacation, to see the relatives or their cousins or anything. They like any reason they have to leave this place is not a reason for the Egyptian authorities or the Israeli authorities. There are 35,000 Palestinians registered to travel through Rafah crossing, and Rafah crossing barely opens from Gaza Strip. So what we're witnessing now is very, very harsh conditions, very miserable economic situation, and last month we used to say that Gaza is on the verge of collapsing. Today I say Gaza literally collapsed. You see zero people in the streets, you see the markets and shops empty. No money, you people can't even provide their meals. So the Great March of Return is now launched since Land Day, which was on the 30th of March, and it continues. And after 2 days is going to be the fourth Friday. Palestinians are not only protesting for the right of demand, the demand of return. They're also protesting because they deserve a better life. They deserve open borders. They deserve a better humanitarian situation. We are here 2 million people that most of us never left Gaza Strip or saw the other side of the world or even went to Jerusalem or the West Bank or the 1948 lands. The situation is very bad, and that's why Palestinians every Friday are protesting and marching towards the fence. So Palestinian, like, they're unarmed, they're only chanting slogans. We can always hear every Friday and every day the national anthems and Palestinian songs. They cook there, they dance dabka there, and they do everything. Uh, they only go near the fence because they believe that they have the right to return. That's it.
Yes. Now, talk about the Israeli response to this, because what you told me earlier was that 36 Palestinians have been killed, 4,000 have been injured, and they are not using anything stronger than rocks.
Okay, so I want to correct the number. It's 33 Palestinians have been killed so far of 3 Fridays of rage. The Palestinians are only using stones and tires. They're burning tires. So you can see tires versus snipers, tires or stones versus live ammunition, rubber bullets, and tear gas canisters, tires and stones versus tear gas drones. So the Israeli forces have been using excessive forces, lethal forces. They have been using a lot of developed and weapons that we never even saw. Last Friday, they fired a green uh, tear gas canisters. That this was the first time we see this, and it causes a very bad situation for everyone who inhales it. Like, Palestinians are not using weapons, they don't have guns, they're not shooting. How can you kill 33 Palestinians in 3 weeks?
Well, this
How
is a
can you how can you injure 4,000 Palestinians in 3 weeks, and more than 80 80 of these are women. More than 300 of these are children. There were two Palestinians under 16 years old that have been killed. And what's going on is ridiculous and crazy, because you never expect this kind of reaction with peaceful protesters. You understand me, right?
Yes. Well, I think this is the difference for us here in the United States, because even with Operation Cast Lead, which I believe was the name of the operation in Gaza in 2014, am I correct? That was Cast Lead?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, even with that, the Israelis could say that Hamas is lobbing rockets into Israel. And even though they said that, our response here, those of us who want peace, was that the response was disproportionate. What the Israeli army did to a few ineffectual rockets, which, by the way, they have the Iron Dome, so they can intercept those rockets before they hit. They have underground bunkers that they can warn their people to go into. So even if these rockets were guided, which they're not, they stand no chance against the Israeli army. So can you describe, just for people who may not know or remember, what Operation Cast Lead was back in 2014?
So what happened in 2014, maybe I was like 16 years old at that time, or 17 years old, and I was still so young, and I didn't understand anything at politics that time. I remember that we had Palestinian resistance, and all I remember is the bombings, and I remember the airstrikes, and I remember the fire, and I remember everything, and I remember that dozens of Palestinians have been killed and injured, and what happened at that time was seriously ridiculous. And everyone is scared of it escalating to a new war or a new attack on Gaza. So that's why it's what's happening now is like we're threatened of anything against the Palestinians in Gaza Strip. We're very scared because we believe that there's no one on our side now, you know? So I just want to mention something very small, that Palestinians in Gaza Strip are not Hamas. We don't, not every one of us like encourage Hamas or on Hamas's side. There are only a few people, and a lot of people are paying this because they live in the same place, you know? So
Yes.
that's what really happening.
Yes, I want to talk about Hamas a little bit. We spoke in the pre-interview about Hamas because the American Jews and the American government and politicians who defend the actions of Israel always talk about Hamas and how they're terrorists, and but people forget that actually George Bush, set up elections in the Gaza Strip, and that we had wanted Hamas at the time because we thought that they would be a good counter to Fatah, the Palestinian Authority. But then after they came into power, we turned on them. Tell us about Hamas and whether they enjoy the support of the Palestinian people. Because we always talk about in this country how we elect leaders that don't enjoy the support of the American people, our current president being one. So it's very important for viewers to understand how the Palestinian people think, and they don't take out their feelings against the government on the people.
So what's happening right now is the Palestinians in Gaza especially lost trust in any leader. So whether it's a Palestinian leader with Hamas or with Fatah, we literally don't trust both sides. And we were all hoping for a successful reconciliation process back in last year, and it never worked. So everyone got depressed and got those negative vibes that these people are actually giving up on the Palestinians, especially on Gaza. So now we lost trust on both sides. What happened in 2007, that Palestinians were sick of the PA and how they were ruling Gaza. So they said, let's try and change it, and let's try something new. When you want to change like the brand you're wearing because you're sick of, or you're not having fun, when you're wearing this brand again, and then we're like, we'll give it a try and we're gonna elect these people. And what happened is that Hamas started to be a very conservative, imposing Gaza as being conservative place. Palestinians in Gaza love to live, love to dance, love to party, love to travel, love, literally they love like really love to life. And Hamas totally tortured us. Like they started to torture every person who has his pants, like how the rap guys and thug boys and all these stuff. They also wanted us to carry on with Sharia law and being religious, and not all the Palestinians go with this flow. Like I don't wear hijab. At the beginning, it was very hard for me to go and not wear hijab in the streets, and I overcame this. So what's happening is like there's a very low percentage of people who support Hamas, but there's a very very large percentage of people who don't support Hamas anymore. And how can 2 million Palestinians like get blamed for being in the same part of the world with Hamas? You know?
Are there any other parties that you can vote for? I mean, are the elections fair and open?
Well, they have been trying to make hold elections for more than 3 years, and it's not working. Whether President Mahmoud Abbas rejects or Hamas rejects, and it's just a chaos. No one can. They didn't even launch elections. I really want to add something that just right now, breaking news: Israeli tanks are shelling airstrikes, are shedding like shells on the in East Gaza. That's just right now. It's happening now. So since the beginning of 2014, since that time, they didn't stop airstrikes. They didn't stop shelling us with their tanks, and they do that every day. Whether they're targeting resistance sites or Hamas sites or armed ring sites, I don't care. But there are people living around these sites, and they hear these noises, and they're getting traumatized, and all these stuff. So
Yeah.
their aggression on the strip did not end, and especially what's happening on the fence every Friday is totally ridiculous.
Now let's talk about Egypt, because we talked earlier today about Egypt is also on the border, and Egypt is working with Israel right now. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Israel are working together, which I find very ironic because the whole justification that they've used in America to get us to keep supporting Israel is that the Arab neighbors want to drive them into the sea. And not only do they not want to drive them into the sea, they're working with Israel right now because they see that the enemy of their enemy is their friend. And in this case, their enemy is Iran. And Egypt and Saudi Arabia are working against Iran, and they're also working against Syria. And that's what this whole war is in Syria. It's a proxy war because Assad is siding with Russia and Iran. Assad harbors Hezbollah, which is the arch enemy of Israel. So tell us what Gazas have to deal with their neighbor Israel. I mean Egypt.
Okay, so the only open air window to Gaza Strip is Egypt because it's the only way out to these people who want to travel, to study abroad, to work abroad, and all do these stuff. Rafah barely opens its border. When we say an Israeli siege, we add an Israeli-Egyptian siege imposed on Gaza, or a siege that has been imposed by Israel and Egypt on Gaza, because it has been more than 11 years, and they have been we have been waiting or hoping for the Egyptians to stand our side and to open this flow, to open these borders and to open these crossings, to have these Palestinians. But what's happening is, no, they're not doing anything, and they're closing. They're saying that it's because there are lots of uh, armed people in Sinai and all these stuff, but it has been better in the past years and it didn't change. So the Egyptians have been very bad neighbors actually, because even in these openings there have been injured people and patients, and they're one of these patients was a prisoner in the Israeli jails, and he was released and he was very sick, and they banned him to enter Egypt and to get his treatment. So what's happening now is very ironic, because the Egyptians are Arabs and we're Palestinians and we're Arabs, and they're literally not standing on our side. And this is very sad, because we never expect this from a neighbor and a person that we have, like, we're just on the other side and we're neighboring them. So everyone's very sad and very pessimistic of what's happening now, because it's not ending and no one is on our side.
Yes. Now, let's talk about the resistance in Israel, because I have always thought that, you know, it will take a new generation to change things. But I just watched Max Blumenthal's interview with Abby Martin on her program on Telesur called The Empire Files. And this program, by the way, was removed by Google, removed from YouTube, and Vimeo, to its credit, still has it up. It's up on its platform. And he was talking about the justice minister who's in there now. Let me find my notes. Her name is Ilan Glickman. She's in charge of the justice ministry. And he was saying that the new generation of Israelis are have more of a Jewish identity than a nationalist identity, which was the founding of the state of Israel. People were more nationalist, and of course they were seculist, a lot of secular. In fact, they were socialist. So he was saying that this leaves no place for anyone who is a non-Jew. He was saying, well, let me see if I can just cut. I'm going to go back to the screen sharing and show what he had to say, because it was kind of chilling to me. Let's see, I'm going to share my entire screen, but now, whoa, no, I don't want to do that. Look at that, that's crazy. Okay, let me fix that. How do I fix that? I'm trying to tell you, I've never. Hold on, I'm going to try it again. Screen share, application window. Let me see if this works. No, dude, I don't want iTunes. Cancel. Sorry, bear with me, folks. I'm going to try to figure this out. I don't want iTunes. I'm going to try. Okay, so here's Abby Martin. Here's Max. Okay, hold on. Let's see if this works.
You look at the direction of Israeli society. You just look at the polls from Israeli Democracy Institute that show that a majority of youth state their refusal to sit in a classroom with an Arab or a non-Jew. That a majority of youth favor a kind of one-state apartheid solution. In 2011, in this poll, a plurality of Israelis stated their support for placing Arab citizens of the state of Israel in internment camps during wartime. 3/4 of Israelis in a recent poll reported by the Times of Israel, 3/4 of religious nationalist Israelis declared their support for the full ethnic cleansing of Palestinian citizens of Israel, the 20% of Israel who are Palestinian citizens. And 80% said that they boycott Arab businesses. So you look at the direction of Israeli society, and you have to conclude that there's no hope for change from within. That those of us on the outside who want to see a different outcome than perpetual conflict can't work from inside Israeli society. We don't have a place for convincing people. There has to be pressure from the outside. And the pressure has to start here, because it's Washington and the US government that has funded radicalization in Israel. They've paid for this whole project, because every time Israel builds settlements, every time they give money to the settlers, every time the education ministry brings kids to Hebron to see the settlements, every time that They decide to teach kindergartners about the Holocaust and scare kindergartners into an authoritarian mindset. And every time they assault Gaza and get as much time as they want, the U.S. is there to pay for the whole project and to rearm them. And so they're rewarding radicalism in Jewish-Israeli society, and that's really ultimately why this trend is continuing.
Okay. So I don't know if if the viewers were able to see this. Hold on a second. Now I can't figure out how to get out of it. Okay. Hold on. Sorry. I may have to edit this show. Okay, I'm back. So that's pretty frightening. And so I'm wondering, Hind, what do you think of, have you been able to make any contact with Jews in Israel who feel differently, who want there to be peace?
No, and I don't want to do that. And I would never do that. And I would never want to contact anyone from these people, because I believe that they, like, between themselves, like from their inner, from their inner souls, they know the truth, and they know that they have been treating us in a very bad way, and treating us in a using very well developed weapons against kids, women, children, men, and everything. And it's not about hatred, but it's about how they're treating us. And I really hate everyone who's trying to do the normalization process and believe that we're gonna be friends or whatever. They have been treating us in a very bad way, and I'm very sorry to say this, but I would never want to contact anyone who, even if they think it's different. But as Hind and as a Palestinian girl who have been living here for 23 years, I won't do that, and I won't like to do that.
Okay. Well, that's a very perfect segue into our next guest, who is Ilan Glickman. And he is a 24-year-old Jewish man who grew up here in the Jewish community of Los Angeles through summer camps, youth groups, and Jewish day schools. He's been organizing with If Not Now, a movement to end the American Jewish community's support for the occupation for the past year. And just last week, he was arrested while demanding that the Jewish Federation condemn Israeli violence in Gaza. Welcome to my show, The Robust Opposition, Ilan.
Hey, Lauren, yeah, thanks for having me. Sorry I got on kind of late there. There was a bit of a mix-up on my part. Thanks for having me.
That's okay. I wasn't going to get to you till the second half hour anyway.
Gotcha.
So you just saw that clip from Max Blumenthal in which he talked about the young Jews in Israel and how it really kind of depends. It's all up to us here in the United States, outside pressure. How did that, before we talk about your involvement, your organization, what actions you guys did last week, how did just listening to that make you feel?
I mean, well, it's really upsetting to see, the state that so much of Israeli society is in today, as I think we're kind of seeing this all over the world, but in Israel specifically, we're seeing like a pretty quick move to the right. And, in Israel, it really doesn't seem like it's showing any sign of slowing down. And so I think if we're going to really focus on ending the occupation, we need to figure out where exactly it is we can actually start dismantling the many pillars that support the occupation. And one of them is the American Jewish community and our tacit, complicit, sometimes explicit support of the occupation. And so that's where I feel as an American Jew that my voice can actually make the most difference, is by telling my communities that we can no longer stay silent while the IDF and the Israeli government imposes this military occupation upon millions of Palestinians, an occupation that has been going on for 50 years now and is unfortunately not showing really any signs of slowing down. It only really seems to get worse. And so we're telling our community we need to stand up and be very clear that this occupation goes directly against the Jewish values that we were raised with. And we can no longer allow our communities to support this occupation in our name. And we can't allow U.S. politicians to continue funding the occupation in the way that they have, in the way that Max Blumenthal discussed, by invoking American Jews and saying, look, this is what American Jews want. They want to support Israel. And that's we're trying to show that that's not that it's that American Jews don't want to support the occupation.
Okay.
And
let's talk. I want to talk to you about your organization, If Not Now. How long has that organization been in existence? Tell us the principles on which it was founded, and how, in your estimation, is it different from other progressive Jewish organizations such as Jewish Voice for Peace, or J Street, which is supposed to be, a lobbying group that's very different from AIPAC?
Yeah, very different from AIPAC. If Not Now sort of started out of the 2014 war in Gaza, which is actually, it's kind of a part of my personal story too. A lot of people saw the headlines that were coming out. It kept going up from 500 to 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 Gazans killed in Israeli airstrikes. And we were all horrified by this. We'd all grown up in the American Jewish community, learning about how great and moral Israel was supposed to be. And then suddenly, as adults, we see this staggering number of Gazan civilians killed. And we were all shocked, and we were looking for leadership from our community and from our leaders, and we saw nothing. And so a group of activists got together in New York. They did the Mourners Kaddish for the lives lost in Gaza, and they saw that it really just had a huge amount of momentum. There were a lot of people who wanted to get involved. There were a lot of people who were seeing, who were really disturbed by the silence from our American Jewish community. So they spent a year incubating it, thinking about a strategy, figuring out how they were going to make it, how they could actually, make a mass movement. And then a year later, that's exactly what they did. They started If Not Now, the movement to end the American Jewish community support for the occupation. Now we're like across the country in 15 different cities, all doing actions. And it was, we actually have like a set of founding principles. I don't want to go through all of them because I can't remember them all off the top of my head. And there's kind of like a lot there. But I will say, we're very focused on specifically targeting our community and building up a mass movement so that it becomes the common sense that the American Jewish community is opposed to the occupation. Okay. I think right now that's simply not the case, and we're looking to change that.
Okay, well, give me some of the principles. Talk about Rabbi Hillel, from where this came in. And then I want you to talk about your personal Jewish upbringing, because I think it's kind of illustrative of a lot of American Jews and why they think what they think about Israel.
Great. So we sort of take our philosophy behind If Not Now from Rabbi Hillel's 3 questions. First one being, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? Second one, if I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? And so I'll talk about the first one. We're very rooted in our Jewish tradition. Whenever we are at protests, we sing Jewish songs. We say the Mourners Kaddish when lives are lost. And we really do believe in our we're very connected to our cultural roots. And we believe that a lot of Judaism, especially around Passover, we talk about liberation. We talk so much about our own liberation as Jews, what that meant from like everywhere from, in Egypt, even to the Holocaust. And we talk about that a lot. We make sure that we're very connected to that heritage. But we also know that we cannot be free until everyone is free. And so we want to make sure that we're not only connected to ourselves and to our community as Jews, but that we're also connected to the other people who are suffering. And I think in this case, specifically Palestinians who have been living under this daily nightmare of the occupation. we know that we as Jews, we can't allow that to continue in our name. So we're not just advocating for ourselves as Jews, right? This leaves you the second part. If I'm only for myself, what am I, right? We can't just only be in our tradition and simply build that up within ourselves. We need to bring our sense of justice and liberation out into the world to make real effective change that will improve people's lives. We also know that the occupation has been going on 51 years now, and it needs to end. It needs to end now. So we know just how urgent the moment is. We know just how, hearing from Hind's own testimony, the occupation, it's truly atrocious what's happening, and we need to act right now. So we really make sure to emphasize the absolute urgency of this movement and of ending our support for the occupation. So those are kind of the main principles. That's kind of the philosophy around what we do. We're very rooted in our tradition. We want to bring that out into the world to demand social justice, to demand an end to the occupation, and we're doing that right now. I will say, just because it's an interesting question, how we're different from other Jewish groups doing similar work. One, we're building a mass movement. So whereas J Street is specifically an advocacy group and what they focus on is lobbying, we focus on bringing people out into the streets. We focus on direct actions. We focus on making sure that we are a loud and we are a clear public. And so we're really looking on building our movement to scale. We hope to grow a lot in the next few years. And another way we're actually very different too is, unfortunately, a lot of progressive Jewish groups in our community have sort of been demonized. I think Jewish Voice for Peace is kind of the prime example. Growing up in Jewish day school, I basically heard that Jewish Voice for Peace are self-hating Jews, that they're actually anti-Semitic, and that they just they're basically just like really the Jewish voice for Hamas, is like basically the phrasing I heard. And so, we're looking to create a movement that hopefully doesn't have that stigma, because we're looking to really appeal to the Jewish community. Jewish Voice for Peace is a solidarity group, and they do really amazing work in that sense. We're specifically a group looking to change the American Jewish community. And I think one thing that makes us really different from a lot of others is we focus on what unites us as Jews as opposed to what divides us.
Yeah,
so for that reason,
I wanted to ask you about that, because you said there were 3 things that you don't take a stand on. You want to go through that? Yeah.
So we don't take a stand on BDS. We don't take a stand on Zionism, and we don't take a stance on one state, two state. We know that these conversations in the Jewish community are honestly too volatile and just always end up dividing people. So instead, we're focusing on one thing that we can all agree on. We all agree that we want freedom and dignity for all, and we don't want endless occupation. And so we're focusing specifically on that and trying to create a big tent from everyone from like various political standpoints when it comes to Israel-Palestine to unite and basically say together, one way or another, the occupation needs to end.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about what you mentioned, the tactics that you're using. A lot of the tactics come out of the Occupy movement, which I was involved in. And also, like the Occupy movement, we wanted a big tent. So our framing was around the 99% versus the 1%, which was as big of a tent as you can get. But the tactics too, the occupation of elected officials' offices, the protests, the blockading of buildings. Can you speak to your tactics and specifically describe the 2 things that went on last week in California? Your blockading of the entrance to Senator Dianne Feinstein's office in San Francisco, and you're blockading the entrance to the Jewish Federation.
Yeah, definitely. I will say first, we're definitely very inspired by movements like Occupy, by movements like Black Lives Matter, by the Dreamers. We work with a lot of different other other groups doing similar work. Cosecha is one of them. And yeah, we definitely take a lot of inspiration from those groups to see what's worked for them. And so that's kind of why we also, after once we started hearing about the violence in Gaza, we had to demand that our leaders and our institutions speak out. So there was a lot of actions last week. I think in total, the number might have grown, honestly. I think 37, if not now, activists have been arrested in various actions throughout the country. Last week, we blockaded the offices to Senator Chuck Schumer, demanding that he condemn the violence. And as a progressive and Jewish leader, that he stick up to those values. 7 people were arrested there. On Friday, 9, if not now, activists were arrested outside of Senator Dianne Feinstein's office, also demanding that she condemn the violence. And actually, like an hour later, after they were arrested, she tweeted saying, like, condemning the violence on both sides, which is not quite what we were asking, as you can imagine.
like Trump in Charlottesville.
Yeah. She took a very like middle of the road. Didn't even specifically say Israeli or like Israeli army violence, which is what it is, right? I mean, we were asking her to condemn specifically that snipers were shooting Palestinian protesters, Palestinian children, reporters in the back who posed absolutely no immediate threat to Israel in any way. And she unfortunately didn't do that. But we did get her to respond, and so we're counting that, the fact that she responded at all, as a kind of victory for us. And then I was involved specifically in, I blockaded the doors to the Jewish Federations of Los Angeles. The Jewish Federation is the largest Jewish institution in America, and they've criticized Israel before. When Israel backtracked on its promise to have an egalitarian prayer space at the Western Wall where women and men could pray together, the Jewish Federation quickly released a statement criticizing Israel for that decision. And so our thought was, if you can criticize Israel when they impinge on Jewish religious freedom, why can't you criticize Israel when they, I mean, impinge is just a complete understatement, when they shoot Palestinian protesters in the back, completely ignoring the humanity and livelihood of Palestinians. I mean, it's just atrocious the way they pick and choose when to criticize Israel. And as their constituents, it was unacceptable to us. And their silence spoke volumes about where their priorities are. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be around actually sticking up for Jewish values. So we blockaded the doors, demanded that they release a statement condemning the violence. They chose instead to arrest us.
Yeah. So let me ask you about that. Occupy was great for a few months, and then the Department of Homeland Security had a conference call with 28 mayors, mostly Democrats, and within weeks, most of the Occupy encampments were cleared. So it is a great tactic, but and we did change the national conversation from the phony issue of the deficit to wealth and income inequality. But ultimately, Occupy was criticized for not having a set of demands or not getting involved in electoral politics. And I personally went from the Occupy movement in 2011, 12, and even 13, because I was still involved with Occupy Venice, which continued on, to the Bernie Sanders campaign in 2015, because I felt that had Occupy believed in electoral politics, and if they had a candidate, it would be Bernie. And of course, Bernie brought to attention the disastrous Citizens United decision and how money influences politics, and it allows groups like AIPAC to give unlimited amounts to politicians. So my question to you is this: do you think your organization is going to look into getting into electoral politics or trying to do something about money in politics? Because it just seems to me that no matter how many people get arrested outside of Feinstein's office or the Federation's office, these politicians are still going to be answering to the people who write them checks for their campaigns.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in a way we already are getting involved in electoral politics. I mean, just the fact that we are like demonstrating outside of politicians' offices. Last year, we had a huge protest outside of AIPAC. And so I think in that sense, we're getting involved in politics specifically. That being said, I mean, that's not our focus area, right? The whole idea is that if lobbies like AIPAC, if these politicians, the people who are writing these politicians' checks, if they're saying like, look, the American Jewish public doesn't support the occupation, and that's what Israel is doing right now. That's where this money is going. The hope is that when they're able to see that that the American Jewish community is firmly against it, they'll no longer write these checks to politicians who are supporting that. And we really do believe in the power of the people specifically. So we want the people to come out into the streets, let our leaders and our institutions know exactly how we feel, which is that the occupation needs to end. It's horrible for Palestinians and Israelis alike, and it really keeps absolutely nobody safe. And so the hope is that we can really change the American Jewish public's mind, and that in turn will be able to change our politicians and our institutions. And I mean, basically that U.S. politicians won't be able to just write these blank checks to Israel anymore and say like, oh, like this is for Jewish security, right? This is for the Jews specifically, because we know that the American Jewish public wants this. That the American Jewish public, we know that they do not want the American government funding the occupation like they currently are. And so once we come out in the street and say that, we hope that our elected politicians, the ones who are supposed to represent us, will start representing the views that we come out and say loudly and clearly.
Okay, well, you know I support you, and I don't want to rain on your parade, and I'm generally not a cynical person, but I have to say that you are the age of my older son, and I had children late in life, and I've been following this situation my entire life, and I really think that the American Jewish public is not, I mean, perhaps your generation, but the American Jewish public as a whole is very ill-informed. I like to say that there is more criticism of the Israeli government in Israel than there is in the United States. And for me to find out what's really going on over there from the Israeli perspective, I read Haaretz, which is kind of the progressive liberal newspaper in Israel. And I think that these politicians are very loath to criticize what Israel's doing just because of the propaganda that has been disseminated by, our government, the military-industrial intelligence complex, which makes a lot of money from perpetual war. And the Middle East is the site of perpetual war, let's face it. I mean, what's going on in Syria right now, case in point. As soon as Donald Trump starts tweeting that we're getting out of Syria, there's another false flag operation that they're trying to blame on Assad, and there's no proof that it was Assad. The only people that are saying it was Assad is the White Helmets, which is a group that is part of regime change, trying to overthrow the Assad government, a group that's actually allied with the al-Nusra Front, which is the opposition group that the U.S. is funding, that is actually an outgrowth of al-Qaeda. So the American people don't really understand what's going on in our country, in foreign countries, and the mainstream media is not covering these demonstrations. They were not covering the Occupy movement. In fact, how I first learned of RT, where Hind reports, is their coverage of the Occupy movement. Now, you can say that it is funded by the Russian government, and the Russian government is against the U.S., which is, of course, what the mainstream media is telling us. But in fact, RT has a lot of professional journalists who have worked for other outlets before, will work for other outlets afterwards, and they're not agents of the Russian government. Yes, it is in their interest to show dissent in the United States, but they were the only ones showing the Occupy movement fairly. And same thing with Press TV, which was the American station, or the English language version of Iranian television. So I don't understand how we're going to show anyone that we are against what they are doing in Palestine when we have the politicians we have, when we have the media that we have, and when we have the education system that we have. Why don't we talk about your background? Because you did go to Jewish day school and religious school and Jewish summer camps. what kind of, I don't want to use the word indoctrination because that's kind of a big question, but what kind of education did you get about the situation growing up?
Yeah, cool. Well, for the sake of this conversation, we'll call it an education. So I mean, I got a very, very skewed version of what's happening in Israel-Palestine today. I mean, so many examples of it. I mean, I remember specifically, I was talking to my sister about this, who also went through the same exact Jewish upbringing as I did. And we both went to Oberlin College, which is like a pretty liberal, radical place. And that was the first time I ever heard public dissent around Israel. And I remember I was talking to my sister about it, and she asked me, she's like, so like, what did you actually know about the conflict when you got to college? And I thought about it, and I said, I knew absolutely nothing, which was shocking to me. These activists on campus from Students for Free Palestine, I remember they would like try and talk to me, and I'd say I was Jewish, and they'd like ask me these questions about, you know, what's happening with like settlements or the Green Line and pretty basic technical issues about the occupation. And I just didn't know what they were. I had absolutely zero idea what settlements were, like what they had to do with anything. I didn't even know what the Green Line was, like very basic questions. All the maps in my Jewish day school did not show the occupied territories. It showed like one contiguous Israel without showing Gaza or the West Bank. I literally had no idea where those places were or how they fit into all this. And I mean, my senior year of high school, I remember we had a class, we had a mandatory class called Israel. It was supposed to be a class specifically about the conflict, but pretty soon we realized that it was actually a class about how to combat like Free Palestine activists on campus. And they even had someone come in, I think from the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, and give us a little tutorial about how to deal with Free Palestine activists during apartheid week, and basically indoctrinated us to think that all these activists were extremely anti-Semitic. And so that was really the education I was given. And then when I got to college and came into contact with other viewpoints, I was horribly ill-equipped. I just had no idea what was going on, and it caused me to shut down. I was really freaked out. The community I joined in college was giving me a completely contrary narrative to what I'd heard literally my entire life, and that really freaked me out. It really made me question my Jewish identity. I just shut up about it because I decided I don't actually know what's going on. It's too complicated. I don't want to deal with it. And that was really how it went for me until 2014, when the war on Gaza happened, and I saw the amount of civilians killed, and I said, I don't care what anybody says. I don't care what I hear from my community back home. This is unacceptable. And that's really when I changed my view about Israel. I said, one way or another, this action in and of itself has to be condemned. And that was kind of how I started my path to doing anti-occupation work, was around that. But it really did start from a disappointment and distrust of my own community for not giving me the whole picture. And Lauren, I think someone was talking about like the education that people receive in Israel, and hearing that, I was like, wow, I received a very similar education in America from American Jewish institutions.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting that you talk about 2014 because I will say that I've been an activist, you know, my whole life, but really going strong since about 2001 when George Bush started making noises about invading Iraq. And whenever Israel did something horrible in Palestine, I would always come out to the federal building, and I would be on the side of the street with the Palestinians. And the Jews, well, I shouldn't say the Jews because I'm a Jew, but the Jews who support Israel would always be on the other side of the street. And there's a Stand By Me or Stand For Me or one of these organizations. Yeah. Really, what's it called?
Stand With Us.
Yeah, Stand With Us. And I used to get into these fights all the time with one of the leaders a wealthy woman from Bel Air on Facebook. We would just go back and forth, and she would send me her YouTube videos of all the atrocities the Arabs were perpetrating against the Jews in Israel, and I would send her my videos about all the atrocities that Israel was perpetrating against the Arabs. And it just became so clear to me that we weren't going to change each other's minds. And it really comes from, you know, if you go back to these basic values, I have to ask myself, how did being a Jewish person equate with defending everything that Israel does, no matter what it is? And that's what so many of my, what I call low information voters, but low information Jews in America do. They get the emails from AIPAC or the American Jewish Committee or the Anti-Defamation League of the B'nai B'rith, and they see all these horrible things. I mean, one of the very first videos on my YouTube channel back in 2012 was we protested, LA Jewish Voice for Peace, protested Pamela Geller, who is one of the foremost Islamophobes in this country. She came to prominence protesting against the mosque that was going to be built on the site of the World Trade Towers. She was there with her companion, Robert Spencer, who is also an Islamophobe. And we were maybe a handful, maybe 6 of us, protesting the fact that the Federation was giving their building to, it was the American Zionist Organization, was hosting Pamela Geller. So apparently Jay Levin, who is involved with the Federation and also started J Television, Jewish television, he was called in the middle of the night. He was in Israel. He was called in the middle of the night to let them know that we were there protesting, and he barred them from going into the building. So they had a protest of the Jewish Federation denying their free speech. And we were getting into some of the arguments with some of these members of the American Zionist Organization. And I remember this little old lady, who I shouldn't say is so old, she probably was only about 10 years older than I am, but she was screaming at me and saying, it's people like you that are going to get us sent back to the ovens. And there is just such a fear of the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what they kind of throw in our faces every time, that if we don't stand strong for Israel, we're going to be annihilated again. When in reality, the Jews are the ones doing the annihilating. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an extremely complicated history, obviously, and I mean, it's something that like I would rather like take a lot more time to really delve into. But I think in Jewish culture, in Judaism, we have a lot of historical trauma that we have to deal with. Everything from, you know, the Holocaust, and I mean everything before that. So much of our history has to do with trauma. And I think, you know, what we're seeing today in Palestine comes from a lot of fear because of that trauma. People are so incredibly afraid, and they jump to the quickest thing that they think is going to help keep them safe, which unfortunately in this case is endless occupation. And I mean, it's kind of a twofold issue, because one, it really doesn't keep anybody safe, and two, it's a horribly unethical way of just continuing this cycle of trauma that's happened throughout history. And as Jews, as people who have experienced a lot of trauma in our history, have experienced genocide, it's pretty horrifying to then see atrocities being done in our name.
Yeah.
And to really lose sight of our own history. I
want to say also that you know, there was some findings that just came out in a study that said that people are forgetting the Holocaust. 11% of adults and 22% of millennials haven't heard of or aren't sure of the Holocaust. 31% of adults and 41% of millennials believe 2 million or fewer Jews were killed in the Holocaust. 37% of adults could name Poland as a country where the Holocaust occurred. 45% of adults and 49% of millennials could not name a concentration camp. 41% of adults and 66% of millennials could not correctly identify Auschwitz as a concentration camp. 15% of adults think people should be allowed to use Nazi symbols or slogans, and 11% of adults think it's acceptable to hold neo-Nazi views. So when you look at these statistics, along with the statistics in the poll that Max Blumenthal was quoting in Israel, we see this incredible intolerance for the other. And like you said in your opening remarks, this is happening all over the world. And this is how we have the Brexit vote. And this is how we had, Trump come into power. Because people's economic situations are getting so bad that instead of looking at the root cause, which is the increasing wealth and income inequality, the 1%, the 1/10 of 1%, they're blaming the other. And to me, this is as bad as it's been in my lifetime. And I'm just, I just don't know how we're going to turn this around. Well, anyway, we've gone for almost an hour, so I want to close the show. I want to ask either of you if you have any question for the other, and if not, what closing remarks you'd like to make. So we'll start with Hind. Do you have a question for Ilan, or would you like to make some closing remarks, or you could do both?
Well, okay. So I really appreciate all the efforts, and I really appreciate how they have like these voices, and they're raising their voices, the voices of the Palestinians. What we're facing today is is very miserable, and it has to end sooner or later. I don't know when, and we're expecting like days. Like the 15th of May is like everyone is expecting something very big and more blood and more rage. So I really want you to keep posted and stay tuned on what's gonna happen. I'm very scared. I'm very scared if something happens and we lose more people, because I know like it still didn't happen and we already lost 33, and more than 3,000 Palestinians are now disabled because they have been using those explosive bullets that don't kill. If they didn't kill you, they completely ruin your life and ruin your bones and everything. So I really want you to raise the voice of what the Palestinians have been facing, not just this year or this month, but since the past 50 years. And I really would like to thank you for having me here on this show. And I really like to, like both of you guys are really appreciated. Our problem is not with the Jews. Our problem is with the Zionists that are occupying our land and occupying our lives. That's what I really wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Ilan, do you have a question for Hind, or do you want to make some closing remarks, or both?
Yeah, actually, yeah. Hind, if it's okay, I just have one question for you. I mean, a lot of What If Not Now does is, we try and bring like this narrative like into the mainstream to get it covered as much as possible. Like that's really our hope, to have headlines, more headlines read about what's happening in Gaza. Is there anything specifically about the story of Gaza that you want to see more of, like more of that, like parts of that story specifically being talked about?
It's like I really want the world to know Palestinians are not only demanding the right of return, they're also demanding the right to live, because they're actually been dying since 11 years. We're like being slowly dying day by day. Um, the crisis is increasing, it's expanding, and now people are going insane because they can't provide their daily meals to their kids because of the blockade and because everything's going on. So I really want the people to say that Palestinians are protesting because they have been facing very bad days. They can't blame us for protesting, and they can't blame us for being near the fence, chanting slogans and chanting the right of return and the right of living a better living. That's the main thing that's happening right now.
Great. Well, I want to thank you both for being on the show. You can find out more information about Hind's reporting by going to the outlets I mentioned before: RT International, KTV2, Palestinian Media Productions, and Middle East Eye. You can find out more about Ilan's organization, If Not Now, by going to, what's your website?
Ifnotmovement.org, and you can also just look us up on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter.
Yeah, that was ifnotnowmovement.org. You cut out a little. So I want to thank you for both for being on the show, and I hope if we need to have you back on again to talk about any updates, that you will be interested in coming back on.
Yeah, okay, absolutely.
Okay. And I just want to close with a little personal story about my situation. As I mentioned, this is not one of the major issues that I've been active on, but every time, you know, Israel does these horrible things, I like to come out in support of the Palestinians, because my Jewish values are about tolerance, compassion, concern for the underdog. And in this case right now, the Palestinians are definitely the underdog. And I have a history of calling out my elected officials when they side with Israel. For instance, my Congressman Ted Lieu, who I actually donated money to, I donated $100 when he was running in 2014, because he assured me that he was against the TPP, against fracking, and he would support net neutrality. Well, on Rosh Hashanah, I received a mailer from him. This was in 2014, right in the middle of Israel's horrible war in Gaza. And he had a picture of a rabbi on the front. This was one of his direct mail pieces that he was sending to Jews in the West Side. And it basically, he wanted to have a resolution to condemn Hamas. And this is the Hamas for lobbing those ineffectual rockets into Israel, as opposed to the disproportionate response of Israel. And then I heard him on a live stream of a debate with his opponent, Elon Glickman, in which he said that people who support the BDS movement, that's boycott, divestment, and sanctions, are anti-Semitic bigots. And seeing as I support the BDS movement, he was essentially calling me a self-hating Jew. And so when it came time to actually vote for him in the ballot box, I could not push his name. The next thing that happened was Paul Koretz, who is my city councilman, offered a similar resolution in the LA City Council to condemn Hamas. And I went down and testified against that. In my 2-minute comment, I said that my grandfather and my father gave literally millions of dollars to the state of Israel, but they would both be turning in their graves if they knew what the right-wing government of Israel was doing to the Palestinian people. And then I said, these are not my Jewish values. So when I learned of If Not Now last week, first I saw the live stream of their action at Dianne Feinstein's office, and I've protested her many a time. I knew that I had to have some representative on their show. I like their message, I like their tactics, and while I have expressed skepticism about their ability to succeed, I wish them well. What they want is what I want, and that is ultimately peace in the Middle East, and peace around the world, and dignity for all human beings, no matter which country they live in, no matter which religion they practice. And that is my hope. So thank you all very much for watching today's special edition of The Robust Opposition, done for the first time live on my YouTube channel. And I hope that you keep watching and that you keep fighting today.
Thanks, Lauren. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.